This is the engine in my Corvette Z06. Everything you're looking at here is completely normal, right up until it isn't.
So yeah, that is a 50-foot intake tube. The question that I wanted to answer was simple. Does the length of the intake tube before the throttle body matter on any scale? This part of the intake system tends to be overlooked. And what I wanted to know is that for a good reason? So we decided to test it. And along the way, we got to capture an acoustic event that few people have ever heard. Isolated intake sound without any exhaust noise or wind noise or anything. It's very interesting. We're going to share it with you later in the video. We structured this test starting with essentially no intake tube and then adding length in 10-foot increments up until we got to the full 50-foot length. At each increment, we tested two things: wide open throttle power and throttle response. So this is the base setup that we're going to use for all of our testing. We've removed the core support to give as much over radiator clearance for our forward-facing intake. We've got the mass airflow sensor adapted directly to the throttle body. Mass airflow sensors are really finicky when it comes to airflow. Changing your air filter or airbox setup often requires a retune. For that reason, we have the mass airflow sensor disabled in the tune, and we're only using it for intake air temp. For a baseline, we're going to slightly extend the intake just to make sure that we're not sucking hot air from behind the radiator.
For testing throttle response, we performed a series of snap tests, transitioning from a steady state partial throttle condition to wide open throttle. We did this at 2,000 RPM, 3,000 RPM, and at 4,000 RPM. These tests were repeated with each subsequent intake length. Here we have our 2,000 RPM snap test. Our 10-foot test I inadvertently deleted, but there wasn't any good data there that we don't see on the other ones. For the purposes of evaluating throttle response, we're going to look at engine RPM over time in this chart right here. We're going to start with the baseline. You can see we started it at 2,000 RPM. Well, really, we ran each test for 1,000 RPM. So it took a little over 2 seconds to get to 3,000 RPM. When we look at our 20-foot, it overlays essentially the same as the baseline. And that's the same with our 30-foot, 40-foot, and our 50-foot. Looking at our 4,000 RPM snap test, we have our baseline with the short intake. We've got our 20-foot, which overlays the same. You can't even see it. Got our 30-foot, 40-foot, and our 50-foot. So there is no change in throttle response with a long intake tube. We got the same results with our 3,000 RPM snap test, but decided to save you the details.
So throttle response is actually where I thought that we would see the biggest change, especially at lower RPM. I expected it to feel delayed or laggy, but we didn't see that. We didn't see that at any length. But now we're going to take a look at wide open throttle performance. That's where things get a little bit more nuanced.
Here we are looking at our baseline that we recorded with our short intake extension to reach just past the radiator. We had a peak of 358 horsepower at 5,300 RPM and about 370 pound-feet of torque at 4,700 RPM. We're going to start by comparing this to the results of the 10-foot intake tube. And we can see a couple things immediately stand out to us. Looks like we gained about 6 to 7 horsepower, and we also pushed our peak horsepower RPM up about 500 RPM. We gained about 2 pound-feet of torque at the same time. We can see that we gained about 4 pound-feet of torque at 3,000 RPM, but the real story is told up about 5,000 on up. So let's go ahead and zoom into this area. And here we see that down here about 5,000 RPM, we actually lose. Well, here's our torque line. We actually lose torque with the 10-foot intake, lose horsepower here as a result of that. But then above 5,500, we have a pretty sizable gain. This is about 365, and we are at, let's do it here, about 354 and 365. So we gain about 11 horsepower up at about 58, 5,900 RPM. We can see that we have a loss followed by a gain. That is not random. What's happening here is resonance. Changing the intake length changes when pressure waves arrive back at the intake valve. At 1 RPM, they arrive at the wrong time and power dips. A few hundred RPM later, the timing lines up better and the power not only comes back, it actually recovers and we see more. By changing the intake length, we're changing the timing. Sometimes that timing hurts cylinder filling, sometimes it helps. That's why you see a drop followed by a rise. I'm going to toggle the graph from the 20-foot test on and off for a moment so that you can see how it compares to what we already have laid out here. Not a lot of variation down low. We got a few pound-feet of torque here and there. But again, the story is told up high, although we don't have the same level of variation that we did with the 10-foot intake. So here we see a similar thing. We've got a few places that, we pick up a couple, 2 or 3 pound-feet of torque down lower in the range. Again, we see a smaller dip here now. It's about 3 horsepower at 5,500 RPM. And we see a larger, I guess a larger gain, not as large of a gain as we saw before, about 8 horsepower here, about 5,800 RPM. If you look, still our horsepower and torque is up over baseline. Moving on to the 30-foot, I'm going to toggle it on and off a few times. Don't worry about what you see here right at the beginning. It's not terribly reliable, but you can see again the the graph more or less follows the same path up until again about 5,000 RPM, give or take. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the 20-footer, and we see that it's starting to flatten out a little bit. We don't see the same level of variability that we do with the shorter one, which is typical of when you get into longer runners in general, how they respond. The variations aren't as extreme. We see that we do have a small loss here, down about 5,200 RPM, but then we have a small gain as well, about 4 horsepower up about 6,200 RPM. If you look here, we're getting really a lot closer to our original numbers from the baseline. Let's keep moving up into the 40-footer. Toggling the 40-footer off and on, you can see even compared to the 30-footer, we picked up a little bit above about above 6,200 RPM, but we have some drops in there. We definitely have some drops in the low 5,000 RPM range. Let's get rid of that 30-footer. This really shows you compared to the baseline, we really at just above peak torque here. We lose a few horsepower. Looks like about 7 horsepower we lose here in the midsection, and we gain just a little bit back up at the top. Not enough to account for that loss here, in my opinion. Finally, let's look at the 50-footer. We actually have a lot more losses there than we did on the 40-footer. Let's go ahead and take that one away. We lose in the mid-range quite a bit. Again, it recovers up high above 6,200 RPM, but we get let's see, we got about a 5 horsepower loss here at 6,000 RPM. And we've got about a 7 horsepower loss here at 5,400 RPM.
During the testing, I decided to put my camera at the open end of the intake, 50 feet away, mostly out of curiosity. And here's where we captured a sound that few people have ever heard in isolation. Every time an intake valve closes, it sends a pressure wave back into the intake. Because the throttle body is wide open, it allows the pressure wave to exit down the intake. In this clip, you're going to hear all 8 cylinders of pressure waves all the way to redline. So we learned a couple of things here, and that was exactly the purpose of doing such an experiment. We learned that intake length before the throttle body has zero effect on throttle response. We also learned that intake resonance tuning doesn't start at the plenum, it doesn't start at the throttle body, it starts at the air filter. Some of you may have gotten to this point and are asking, well, what length of intake should I run? And there's only really one answer to that. That is whatever length fits in the packaging constraints of your engine bay. If you want to see more videos like this, you know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.